You're listening to A Slice of Therapy with me, Alun Parry. So this is episode 201 of this podcast. And I'm noting this because when I hit the 200th episode yesterday, it was a bit of a milestone for me, especially as when I first started the podcast, I decided that I didn't want to do a big podcast, with interviews or, I didn't want it to be particularly long. I just wanted something small and doable that would be useful. Like, what's the smallest thing that I could do that would be useful for people that would allow me to do it every day? And so I decided that I would do this short, little bit of kind of brain food, if you like, on a daily basis. And I'd keep the podcast nice and short because it makes it more doable for me. And I think as well, a short podcast means it's more likely that you can get through it too. And a big part of my idea was that I thought to myself, if I could just do an episode every day, then by the end of a full year, I'll have 365 episodes, which is quite a lot, isn't it? And so I'm way over the halfway mark now. And I'm now on episode 201, just by showing up every day and doing something small and shareable. Now, when we think of change, we often think of doing something massive. And yet the problem with doing something massive is that if we need to repeat that, and as we often do, in order to make change last, we tend to need to keep repeating it. If you imagine, for instance, if you're a bit smelly and you have a bath, that bath isn't good for the rest of your life. That bath has to be had again and again and again. And so when we make change in our life, it's often something that we keep repeating. And the problem with doing big things and setting ourselves big goals, which is often the kind of way that we think about change, is that it leads to burnout, it leads to frustration, it leads to failure too. Because what we know about behavioural science is that actually our motivation goes up and down. Sometimes we're super motivated and we can get all sorts done and feel like we can conquer the world. And other times, quite naturally and quite normally, our motivation drops really, really low. And so what I wanted to do with this podcast is to make sure that even if my motivation was low, as inevitably it will be because I'm human, just like everybody's is, that I'd still be able to turn up every day and do that small thing so that I'd still be able to get 365 episodes in a year. And because I've kept it small, rather than going for something big, I've been able to do that. Now, the thing that many people miss is that when we make small changes, really tiny changes, tiny improvements, that is, that when we keep repeating them, they're actually not tiny changes at all. Now, one of the things I've done in terms of a project, I suppose, since January is I'm not someone who's really done strength training before, so I decided that I would start swinging kettlebells. And I've worked myself up to a weight which is 2.5 times what I started with. And my goal every day is just to do a little bit more than yesterday. Not a lot more, but a little bit more. And it's the little bit more that is the key to all of this. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's all fine, Al, but little changes don't have big results. And yet, in fact, there's 2 reasons why little changes do actually have big results. The first one is that when we make small changes, the results that we get are not necessarily linked to the size of the change we made. Often what happens is we'll take one tiny step, but the effect of that tiny step will be absolutely enormous. And so often, if we have a journey of 1,000 steps, it doesn't actually take us 1,000 steps to get us there, because some of those tiny steps have the effect of enormous leaps. Even though the step was tiny, the outcome can be much, much bigger. But even if that wasn't the case, the second reason why tiny incremental changes are good is because if you just do the maths of it, let's say that all you did was improve by just 1% every day. Now, improving by 1% every day doesn't sound a lot. I mean, it's not a lot, is it? It's only 1%. It's what you might call a tiny change. It's not a complete overhaul. It's just a little creep forward from the day before. And yet, if over the course of a year, you got 1% better at something or other, you would actually be 38 times better at that thing by the end of the year. So whatever it is that you're wanting to achieve, if you think that you need to kind of have a massive change, well, maybe you do in terms of outcome, but the massive change will tend to come from tiny steps forward. And so rather than setting yourself a really overwhelming target, you can simply try to do something that is repeatable and tiny. Now, every time I do this podcast, that's what it represents. It represents me doing something repeatable and tiny. And so by this point, I already have 201 episodes under my belt. Now, have I done something gargantuan? No, I haven't. I've done something that was really doable for myself. And crucially, really doable for myself, even when my motivation feels low, as of course it sometimes will. And so my invite to you, I suppose, is to beg that question in terms of the things that you want to achieve. What is the tiny thing that you know that you can keep doing even when your motivation is low? That you know that you can keep on showing up and achieving. Now, often we'll go pretty high on this. It might feel low in the first instance, but whatever you come up with first of all, ask yourself, can you really do that every day? Like really take it to the floor, really go small with it to something that is even below what you guess that you can do. Because these tiny increments where you show up and keep on repeating represent your 1% per day. And when you do anything 1% better a day, even though that's only a small step forward, if you try this yourself, go into Microsoft Excel or any spreadsheet and do this experiment, you'll see that by the end of 365 days, you'll actually be 38 times better. Now, if you were to give yourself a goal of being 38 times better, well, that seems really overwhelming. And yet, all it takes is 1% creeps forward. If you can creep forward just a little bit every day and find something that you can do repeatedly, then you will move towards what you're wanting to achieve. After all, like I say, you can't just have one bath and then be completely clean for the rest of your life. You have to keep on having a bath. And the rest of life is just the same as well. The real change comes when we're able to find something that we can keep on repeating. And yet the thing that allows us to keep on repeating is to ensure that we give ourselves a small thing to do. Make ourselves be set up for victory rather than failure. And so to recap, I started off by telling you about my strategy for getting a podcast done every single day for the past 201 days. And I focused in on deliberately creating something that would be easy and doable for me to do and small enough that it would still be useful for you to be able to consume as well. We looked at the metaphor of having a bath and how that is something that is needing to be repeated in order to give you those changes long term. And thirdly, we looked at the power of tiny changes and how, mathematically speaking, even just a 1% improvement each day, which is really tiny, isn't it, will still end up giving you an increase of 38 times better than things currently are. And so that proves, doesn't it, that you don't even need a 1% improvement in order to get to a good place. You could actually do something much, much smaller than that. And mathematically, you would still massively improve your capability and massively improve your life. And so if this has been useful to you, please share it, spread it on so someone else can benefit. If you could subscribe and give us a review, that would be great as well. Subscribing to the podcast is completely free, and it means that you'll never miss another episode again. And of course, you can work with me directly. I'm Alun Parry, and you can find out more at liverpoolpsychotherapy.co.uk. So thanks for listening, and I'll be back again with another one tomorrow.